Okay, we're good.
Oh, we're live. Awesome. So, hello, everybody. Welcome to the Cackle. This is Entry Point's weekly interview series where we highlight startups and small businesses and people that are having an impact on the community. And today we are talking to Jennifer Bradley, who is the director for the Center of Urban Innovation at the Aspen Institute. Very fancy. Welcome to the Cackle.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Yay. So Jennifer is an expert at bringing together different underrepresented voices and ideas to create change. She built the Center for Urban Innovation at the Aspen Institute. Oh my gosh, mouthful. Guided by a deep commitment to making cities both innovative and inclusive, which is great. And because today we are talking about building a culture of innovation and inclusivity. So if anybody has any questions or resources or shout outs or whatever, put them in the comments because we can see those and then we'll try to address them. But yay! So I guess first it would be good if you could just give us a little background on the Aspen Institute and what the purpose was behind the creation of the Center for Urban Innovation.
Okay, so first of all, I have to tell everybody that the Aspen Institute is a little bit of a bait and switch. When I meet people, I'm like, oh, you live in Aspen. And I'm like, oh, hell no, I don't make nearly enough money to live in Aspen. The Institute was founded in Aspen, Colorado, and we do have an absolutely gorgeous campus there where we do convenings, and there's the Aspen Music Festival. Most of our work, though, is centered in DC, New York. We have some outposts. And the purpose of the Aspen Institute was to bring people together to have discussions about what they then called kind of timeless, eternal values. And it was founded in the wake of World War II. And the idea was if we could have just had better dialogue to repair, to connect to values around humanity and humanism, we could avoid these kinds of terrible, wrenching conflicts. And so what unites the programs at the Aspen Institute is this belief in dialogue and bringing people who, as one of my colleagues used to say, who should be talking to each other but aren't, around a table to solve shared problems. So we're very practitioner oriented. Many of my colleagues do research, I do research, but it all starts with this base of practitioners and who can we get around the table to change things and advance things. And when I convene people, I say what we're trying to do here today is say what we don't normally say, right? Because everybody goes into, this is the speech I always make when I'm showing up professionally. We try to get people out of that mode and so that they say what they don't normally say, so that they hear what they don't normally hear. And from that, we can come up with new solutions. And the solutions I care most about are, as you said, ones that make cities more inclusive. Yeah. And I came to this, we were just talking about this before we went live. I co-wrote a book called The Metropolitan Revolution, which has a chapter about Detroit. I co-wrote that book in 2013. And so I was on the conference circuit and people were talking about this new cool thing called Uber. And it was so great because you could just get point-to-point transportation anywhere. And I was like, that does sound cool. But I remember in the late 90s, when I started in the urban field, everybody was talking about jitneys, right? Which were ways that people in densely populated, low-income areas could kind of carpool informally and go to the job centers, which at the time were out in the suburbs. And everybody's like, oh, these jitneys are great, but they're illegal, so too bad. Like you couldn't say jitney without saying illegal. And I was like, why is it okay for Uber to exist when as a self-help system for people of color, it was regulated out of existence? And so that's when I started to think about the juxtaposition between the innovation economy and the ways that cities were trying to position themselves as hubs of innovation, homes of innovation. You needed to have Uber, you needed to have Airbnb, just like several decades ago, you needed to have Starbucks as like a marker of cool. And I thought, well, what if we were innovating towards more inclusion? Because what makes cities work is when you have this kind of social mixing, when people from all kinds of backgrounds come together, formally, informally. It's these kind of productive collisions that allow generativity, creativity, and create these sparks. And if innovation is moving us towards more division, more income division, more kind of people who can access stuff and can't, then that's undermining what the benefits of cities are. So keeping these two streams connected is sort of an existential need for cities.
I've participated in one of your roundtables before a few years ago. And I was also like, while I was there, everyone was like so fancy, like all the other people there at the roundtable. I'm like,
but that's what they think about you. This is the whole thing.
I was like looking around being like, I recognize that person from the news. And so I was like, very like, but you had two rules in the beginning, which I was like, oh my God, what were I can't remember exactly. It was like you had to put up one finger for.
Okay. So, and I've refined it a little. So the way we manage conversations at the Aspen Institute, and many colleagues have helped me kind of learn this. People want to say so many things, and it gets really hard to organize it because by the time you call on the fifth person, what they wanted to say has sort of been superseded, but they really wanted to say it. So the way you manage it is everybody has one of those, when we used to gather in person, that little green sign used to be like a cardboard table tent. And so if you wanted to say something that sort of moved the conversation in a different way, you lifted up your table tent on the side so that you didn't have your. And if you wanted to say something really quick, like, oh yeah, we tried that and it was good or bad, then you had like this one finger or two, you could do two. And what I started to say, because people would abuse the interjection and the ability to do the two finger. And so it's like, okay, two finger means you can say this without taking a breath. If you have to take a breath, it is not a short comment and you need to raise your comment card and I will know if you abuse it and I'm keeping track.
Yeah. And so it was so funny when you said that because I'm a person who loves to say a lot of things, but I also don't know how many things are about to come out of my mouth. And so then I'm like, oh gosh. And then like everyone from the news is around. And so then I was like, oh God, do I move? Do I put, oh my, which one do I do? And then I just,
you get into a flow and it becomes fine. And now when I do more public forums, when people ask questions, right? Because the number of people who abuse the opportunity to be in front of a mic, I will also say, if you have to take a breath, it's probably not a question. It's probably a statement, and that's not what we're here for. But this actually goes to my position as a moderator. In order to create that space for people to feel comfortable, I do set rules at the beginning to make it a space where people know that there is, I take control so you can let go of control. Yeah. I assure you that we're going to get to something, that this is going to be well managed, that we're going to end on time, so that you don't have to feel the burden of managing the conversation and you can just bring out what your heart and mind are combining to say. And I know that can sound like really sort of woo-woo, but as we are having more of these kinds of special conversations in Zoom, I think it becomes really important to understand and respect how to create and hold that space, because that's a trust you're giving me. You're giving me time that you're never going to get back. I'm asking you to do, to talk about things and say very honestly, this is not working.
Yeah. And I thought it was like the conversation was, I'm like super blurry right now. The conversation was totally like, I felt like the best, you pulled together like 25 people probably. And it was like, people were all having their input and people were able to like say what they wanted to say or respond to something in like a very organized manner. So I was like, man, this is like the best roundtable I've ever been in. But yeah, so then sort of, I guess, given the work that you do and the fact that you're in Washington, D.C., and you have like a lot of these conversations with a lot of these influential people, talk a bit about like what you've been seeing across the country over this last year and like how what your outlook is for 2021 and maybe how your thinking has shifted, sort of like where we're headed.
I mean, I think the inclusion conversation really has come to the forefront. as we have seen the racial differences in who's getting COVID worse, who's a frontline worker. That I think has powerfully held the attention of a bunch of people who never had to look too closely at that before. My hope is that we will find ways to sustain this, right? So there was the big surge in awareness last spring and summer, right? And again, by awareness, I mean awareness on the part of people who had the privilege previously to look away and not be aware. Yeah. So we had this big surge, and the black squares on your social media, and everybody buy from a black vendor, buy from BIPOC. And then there was, now that it's Black History Month, people are like, oh yes, there are still people of color, and we still need to do things. My hope is that this will start, that these notions of inclusion, understanding what inclusion really is, will stay at the forefront and allow us to think differently about who gets to be an innovator. Listen to people who are already innovating, and maybe it's not a technical innovation, maybe it's a process innovation, maybe it's a relationship innovation. Give those folks more of a place at the table. The other thing that I'm thinking about a lot is face-to-face versus remote, right? And so I read your report on Washtenaw County, and how there's some percentage, 8%, I believe, of small business owners say they like this hybrid situation. And so we're going to have this really interesting period where we're trying to figure out, okay, what do we need to do face-to-face? What can and should we do remotely, and what possibilities do those open up? I am not a person who believes that we will go to 100% remote work. I think we are living off the interest of all of the relationship capital that we've built over the years face to face. And that will start to fray, and we will rediscover the benefits of being face to face. But we'll also understand that you may not need to be face to face all the time. And I think that there are certain kinds of mid-level gatherings. I don't think anybody's going to get on a plane anymore for a 2-hour meeting at some undistinguished airport hotel. So I think we're going to figure out why we need to come together day to day, and why we need to come together for these big, high-profile networking events. But I'm also reading about people hitting the pandemic wall, and it feels like we hit the pandemic wall, like we hit one at 6 months, and then we hit one at 9 months, and now we're hitting the wall like at a shorter cycle. Yeah, definitely. And you look at what's causing people, or what's causing continued spread, and it's that you can't keep people away from each other. People want to gather in bars, and they want to gather in restaurants, and they want to celebrate life cycle events. And so the next couple of years, I think, will be super interesting as people start to sort out how do we use space and time? I mean, that's really what we're talking about. And what should stay virtual, and what needs to be in person, and how do we sync all that up? And that's absolutely going to be fascinating. And I don't know I think that's just going to be such an interesting area for entrepreneurs, right? To try to help us figure out how to stay connected and manage knowledge when we're more dispersed. For people who design spaces, right? Like, if people can work quietly at home, is that the end of the shared office, or is it only going to be shared office? Because if I was going to be in my own office with my door closed, I might as well be here.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know how we untangle that, but I think that's going to be a really big deal. And as I've mentioned, you can't plan for spontaneity. So how will we be able to capture what we're losing because you and I didn't happen to run into each other at the coffee machine in our office? And I said, oh, hey, what are you working on? And you told me, and I said, oh, wow, you're doing that report for Washtenaw County. I'm actually doing this other thing. So let's
Yeah.
How do
That's a
you,
really good point, because you
how
have
do
to
you
be so
replace that?
intentional about making that connection with someone that you don't ever have those happenstance things. That's a really good point.
Yeah,
Uh,
how do you replace all the things that you wouldn't necessarily seek out? Or like, you can send a general email, hey, is anybody doing work on this? But it's not
yeah.
necessarily the same. And I think people are discounting that really at their peril. And again, I don't quite know how it's all gonna work out, but we're gonna need new ways to knit ourselves together.
Yeah, I like your point too about the technology, and I think during this time, a lot of things like that people have seen work really well because they're technology enabled, that have like opened up opportunity. Like those kinds of things will stay. It's just like my friend in high school, Tom Kosila, shout out. He had a Palm Pilot, and we endlessly made fun of him for his Palm Pilot. Like we would put in little like calendar appointments for just like stupid stuff. And but then it's like cut to like 4 or 5 years later, literally everybody has an iPhone. You're like, oh, yeah. So
Yeah.
it will be interesting to see what kind of technology things like this like sped up or like now get implemented going forward.
And and when we get to recombine, right? Because if I'm in a future where I'm only going into the office, let's say 2 days a week when I have to meet with my colleagues. And then there's 1 day a week that I know I want to work from home to get all my writing done. Like those other 2 days a week, you know what I would really love? I would really love to have some sort of co-working space with other women in the urban and urban adjacent fields.
Yeah.
Okay, so could I get that, right? Could somebody come up with like the matching software, and Bumble tries to do this on its platform, right? You can, no, I don't know that people do, but you can have Bumble for friendships. Well, not, they do it. It's a setting. It's a thing. I don't have Bumble on my phone anymore because my boyfriend.
I don't know, like, oh, you don't have that. I don't have that.
Well, Bumble. But so could you have these different arrangements of matching in space? So could that allow us to be even more creative, right? If we seek out these other kinds of interactions.
Yeah, that is interesting, and it kind of how like incubators and stuff like attempt to be or try to be
Right.
In the past. Like it does seem like it would be cool to kind of be able to have like a, oh yeah, that's the place you go if you're that type of business, and like I like that.
Yeah, so it's like the best parts of most conferences are not the sessions themselves. I shouldn't say this because I put on conferences, but yeah, it's the stuff that happens like in between. So what if we were better at organizing that kind of space for people?
Yeah.
And having that kind of openness, and who curates that, and who but yeah, that's exactly the philosophy of incubators and accelerators. So could you fit those into everyday work and not just in the startup realm?
Yeah, I like that. That would be really interesting, because I feel like I always am like, I use LinkedIn like I use Facebook, where it's like kind of like, hey, like, who can solve for this? And then just like get people to comment and like tell me what I should be doing. And I feel like that would be like really helpful to go to a place like that where you can actually just like around people you can ask that are having a similar experience. So how can, so you work with a lot of like large established, like when people talk about like the system and the institutions, like you work with all those types of organizations. Like, how do you feel like governments and nonprofits and businesses can be more innovative and provide more opportunities for underrepresented groups in their communities?
So the lens that through which I look at this, that's a lot more practical and less philosophical, is procurement. And it sounds like it's like way too in the weeds, but if you think about what good procurement should do, is it shouldn't necessarily buy a particular technology. It should solve a problem. So one thing that all of these institutions should do is think more about the problem that they're trying, like spec out the problem and source solutions, as opposed to sourcing particular kinds of technologies. So we may think we need a streetlight, or in the nonprofit space, we may think we need a new policy prescription, or we may think that the way to do this is through, I don't know, it's like some sort of traditional delivery vehicle. But maybe that's not actually what we need. Maybe we just need to figure out a little bit better what the problem is, and then invite more people to be part of the solution. So again, in procurement, you have some places moving to problem-focused procurement, and they invite people from the community to help them spec out what's really the problem. Because a lot of the things that governments and nonprofits and other big institutions have been doing have not gotten us results commensurate with the amount of money, time, and talent we've put behind them. Okay, yeah. So clearly doing the same things that we have done, why it's not clear to me why we expect that would get us different results. So we need to.
My entire opinion of the government of so you wanted to accomplish this, and then like $9 bajillion and 95 years later, you did this thing to solve that problem. Okay.
and I think it's because we still have not figured out how to show up in places with sufficient humility, and how to listen to the people that we purport to serve, and how to value the expertise of those folks, right? So, again, last week when you had rock star Regina Ann Campbell.
Yeah, I was going to say, I was like, yeah, that's totally like what Regina was saying.
Totally what she is saying. And so, we need to listen to
what we didn't watch last week, she was talking about putting the entrepreneur at the center of what you're doing. And so you're not planning programming for that community. You're soliciting feedback from that community, exactly what their problems are and how you can solve them, and then continuing to solicit that feedback so that you're addressing their actual problems instead of just being here you go, solution. Boom.
Yeah. and actually Detroit is just a beautiful learning laboratory for this kind of stuff, right? So the Detroit Collaborative Design Center, a lot of the work that the Kresge Foundation has supported, a bunch of stuff going on around the Livernois corridor, the planning department doing amazing stuff. They for Ella Fitzgerald Park, when they thought about park activation, 2 city employees went and sat in lawn chairs in the park space and just asked people, what do you want here? Right? As opposed to bringing in all of the top urban planning theory and giving the neighborhood something where the neighborhood's like, yeah, no. Right. And if you also talked last week about NEI, New Economy Initiative, the NEI Innovation Fellows, right? Those are people from the neighborhoods, and NEI said, you know what you need to do. So we're going to give you cash, and we're going to create opportunities for you to connect and support you, but we're not going to try to change you or tell you how to do stuff differently. And I think that it's that ethos that's going to be really powerful. And it forces the people like me who consider ourselves to be experts to kind of step back. And we're technical experts. There are things we know how to do, but we need to put that in service of where communities want to go, and try to do a better hold the tension between what we think communities should do. We're not making it up, right? It's based on research, but have a more informed dialogue with the community about where it is that they want to go, and figure out how to support and engage that. I think that's what's been missing from the approaches that took up, again, so much money and time and talent over the last several decades. And if you center neighborhoods, if you center communities, it's hard to imagine you get massively worse results, and maybe you could get a lot better results.
Yeah, I love that. And I think even as a, small business owner, I don't see this on a large scale, but during the pandemic, you realize that you don't totally know what every person you're working with situation is. Like there'll be sometimes you're working with an organization where you're like, what is going on here? And then you realize like something has happened like behind the scenes because of the pandemic or because of, like social unrest or whatever. Like they've got like different stressors, or even like within our own employees, like, there's people that are like, yeah, my kids are at home because their school is closed and I'm trying to do virtual learning while doing this, and my parents have COVID or something like that. And you're like, oh, is that why you seemed distracted during that meeting? It's like it's so difficult to like, even with a small staff, understand where everybody's coming from and needs to, in order to like be the best. That I'm like, yeah, I can't understand how the government could do that.
Yeah, and also, one thing that I would hope, right, is that we would build better systems for communal resilience, right? So you see all the articles about how women prime working years have dropped out of the workforce. COVID has shown us how alone we are when bad things hit, right? Like if you're a small business owner and you get a really bad case and you're sidelined for 2 weeks, who's running your business? How does that work?
Yeah, I often think of that. Who would do the cackle? Molly would do it. Molly's probably watching right now being like, oh my gosh, no.
I got this. So, but we need better systems for resilience so that it's not all on you. And right. And that's one thing that having a public provision of health insurance does, right? There are systems that we can build that would support entrepreneurship because they de-risk it in some ways. And I think we're seeing that everybody needs a little bit of that de-risking in their lives. And so what's that innovation? How do we build communities of care? And my friend Eric Gordon, who's a professor at Emerson College, he talks a lot about a kind of creating an ethic of care. And it's based on a wealth of scholarship that I'm not familiar with. And I know he wouldn't want to take sole credit for coming up with this idea, but how does this ethic of care start to get reflected in the way government works, in the way nonprofit works, and possibly even the way business works, right? So at the beginning, when businesses were being flexible, and suddenly all the things like, oh no, you can never work at home. It's like, yeah, go ahead and work from home 5 days a week. Mm-hmm. And businesses, those that could, were giving people money to set up their home office. And businesses were saying, hey, we get it. Right? How many emails do you get that says my workday may not be your workday? So please feel free to reply to this email when you're working, as opposed to 11 p.m. when I sent it. Like that's moving a little bit towards the ethic of care, and in my opinion. And so how do we keep moving in that direction? What are those innovations? And I think that community can teach us a lot about that, because a lot of communities have had to rely on themselves, on their neighbors, for a kind of community-centered provision. So what does that look like as we start to knit those things together and scale them up?
Yeah, that's so interesting. I like that. Let's see. I know we're like out of time. But I have a couple more. What are some ways that we can, and you kind of touched on this, so feel free to be like next. What are some ways that we can implement inclusive innovation in our own businesses and organizations?
Yeah, I think it really does go back to listening to the people that we're trying to serve, and not trying to foreground our experience or our belief in what they need or what's good for them. And understanding anybody can be an innovator, and innovation is not just technology. Somebody I've learned a lot from is Demond Drummer, who works in the civic tech space in Chicago. And he says, a circle can be an innovative technology if you bring the right people together in a circle. Garland Gilchrist, who is the lieutenant governor of your fine state of Michigan, says the innovation we need is innovation in relationships. Okay, how do we innovate those relationships so that we can listen to people on the front lines who often know quite well what's not working, but don't necessarily have a way to tell it to the people who can make design changes or do reallocation. So I think it's thinking about innovating in relationships and how to support people in sharing what it is they know and making it safe for them to do that, and getting out of a kind of compliance and monitoring sort of culture.
Yeah. And then I was reading a couple different places that you talk about the culture of failing forward.
Yeah.
And like, so like, what is that and how will it help us kind of combat inequality?
So failing forward is an antidote to what I often hear from people in local government, to some extent philanthropy, but less so. But in local government, you often hear people say, there's zero tolerance for failure. We cannot fail.
Mm.
And I think, have you looked at some of your systems? Because there's failure all the time in local government because it's a human institution doing super hard things.
Yeah.
So failing forward is a kind of a mentality or an approach that says when we try to innovate, which by definition means doing something that hasn't been done before, we will likely make mistakes along the way. And if people are in an environment where a mistake is not fatal, but a mistake is an opportunity to check back in, see what's not working, and correct it on the way to getting to where you want to go, that is a good thing. That will enable more public sector innovation. Whereas if a mistake is career ending, nobody's going to do anything different. And we're going to keep getting the same results that we've always gotten. And I think people are starting to see that the people who work within government are more awesome than that. And the constituents that government wants to serve are more awesome than that. So let's take away those obstacles to awesomeness, which sometimes might look like accepting a mistake, accepting a failure. But this is one of the things that I think that the business community, particularly the ethos of tech startups, can be useful if we sort of distill that wisdom and think about how to apply it. I don't think government should be run like a startup. I don't think government should be run like a business, but there are some notions that are sort of common sense, but they get dressed up with like shiny tech sparkles, and that makes them a little easier to unpack. And one of those is the idea that we're going to, I mean, think how many mistakes were made in the early days of COVID. Think how many mistakes we're making with vaccine rollouts. Think how many mistakes people are making on, in terms of Zoom and setting up Zoom and remote work. Okay, we're learning along the way, and it's better now. And so if we could just keep that ethos, that's also kind of part of an ethic of care, that a failure is not career ending. Now, of course, we've got to bound it, because sometimes failures in government can be truly catastrophic, but sometimes they're not. And so how do we sort that out and create spaces where it's okay to just miss the mark on the first try?
Yeah, where it's not all situations that need the level of bureaucracy that a lot of times like governments run with. And it does seem like, I mean, like even I used to work at a quasi-government organization, and we noticed something incorrect on the website, and the process to get that sentence corrected on the website, it literally took me like 3 weeks to just get them to correct like something incorrect on the website to the correct thing. And I had to talk to like 9 different people and all this stuff. And so it's like, yeah, like there's some things that are like, okay, we see the reason for the bureaucracy to be added in and stuff. And like catastrophic results could happen if not. So, but then there's other
things. You can see why they'd want to keep it
navigate.
But you can also see why they want to keep a tight rein on the website, because you don't want somebody putting like coronavirus misinformation on the website. So it all makes sense, but are the old rules that we have the best that we can do? And I don't think that's the case. I think we can figure out a way to try to safeguard the things we need to safeguard while creating more flexibility to get to an even better future. I think that's possible, because there are so many just brilliant, dedicated people in local government, in the nonprofit sector. I think we can do better than we are doing.
Yeah. And then our last question is, it's Black History Month. Yay. What is something us white women can do to be better allies to the Black community? I know I like love me some white women and our opinions and our things. So that's why I'm like, this will be a good one.
I think just from my own very personal experience, right? I believe that I'm so good-hearted. I believe so deeply in my good intentions. And sometimes under the guise of good intentions, I don't listen and I don't center other people's experiences. And I get defensive and I get my feelings hurt when somebody's like, hey, you kind of blew it on that. I'm like, but I'm so well-intentioned and I'm working in the nonprofit sector and that makes me good. Okay, fine, right? But maybe we could just like let go of that tight grip on our own sense of goodness, and that it gets us out of the responsibility to reflect and stand down. I think we need to get a little bit thicker skin, right? So when people start, there's a new book that's a pretty strong critique of white feminism. And when I first saw the title of the book, I was like, why does it have to be white feminism? And that doesn't seem fair. And why are you criticizing white feminism? Oh, okay. Well, what was going on with me that I had that instant sort of defensive reaction? What do I need to do when that defensiveness comes up to just say, oh, this is unfortunately probably one of those good learning experiences, and I need to go towards the things that make me uncomfortable, rather than imagining that I have this halo over my head because, you know, I'm working so hard for so many people and I talk about inclusion all the time. And okay, yeah, but I can always do better.
Yeah, I think that is really interesting. Like that is definitely like a big challenge that I think a lot of people, like white people, have, of like just being like, but I'm like a good person and I'm trying. So doesn't that like entitle me to some level of like people being nice to me about it or something? Or like, can I just get a pat on the back for being like nice or whatever?
Don't you see how hard I'm trying? You know, and like, yeah. Okay, yeah.
I heard that a lot. We adopted, and I think a lot of people will tell you you're like a really good person for adopting children. Like, oh, God bless you kind of thing. Like they'll just be like, you're such a good person. And I remember like, I never really totally subscribed to that, but like, I'm like, no, I'm not really. But then I remember when I was first reading a lot more about like adoption and like a lot of the trauma that goes with adoption, and was like, I was a little bit like, man, people are really hard. Like these people are really hard on adoptive parents. And then I was like kind of confronting a lot of those like, think like, why am I feeling offended? Did I really think deep down that I was a good person for doing that? Like as if it wasn't like just, and like that's the way it should be. So yeah. That's really interesting. Yeah. Cool. I love that. I love all the things about you, and I could talk to you for a million years. And also looking at your LinkedIn, you are very intelligent. My God. All those schools. Like I was just
went to a lot of schools.
What? Like, my goodness.
I went to a lot of schools. That is, I like school. Although I did not like law school so much. I did not, I partly because I was a lot older, but no, so yeah, don't go to law school because you think it will solve your problems. Go to law school because you want to be like actually a real life lawyer, but don't go to law school because it's like a general education. If that's the only clip that goes out on Twitter, then this is
That's so funny. I'll have to put it right next to the clip of Adrian Omer from Kresge was on 3 weeks ago. And he also went to Georgetown, but he went to U of M for law school. And like his opinion about like everyone going to law school, I'm like, I'll just put those two together, and then everyone will be like, and they'll be like, there's your law school opinions for you.
No shit on Georgetown. It's a fantastic school, amazing professors, amazing opportunities. But law school is a very specific kind of education. It's not like a general open your mind to the world education.
Yeah. Lawyer. Are you from Washington, D.C. originally?
No, I am from Austin. But not like today cool Austin. I'm from like, so there are all the t-shirts that say keep Austin weird. I'm from that Austin. I'm from like the authentically weird, like 1970s, 1980s.
Wait, what's so weird about it? I thought being weird was like keep Boston weird, like being liberal and like kind of.
Yeah, but like it used to be a lot weirder, right? It used to be like weird. And now all that weird is like cool weird, but it used to be much more like hippie, and now it's too expensive to be genuinely hippie. I'm not from like cool urbanist Austin, to the point that like it became very important to me to live somewhere where there was like a rigorous public transit system. But I'm from Austin, Texas.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Okay, cool. Well, thank you so much for joining us and sharing all of your wisdoms, or some of them anyway. And I will hopefully talk to you more soon.
Look forward to it.
Cool. Thanks.